I'm joined live now by Kim Kataguiri. He is the Brazilian congressman of the Brazil Union Party. He's also a founding member of the Free Brazil movement. He's joined me from São Paulo, Brazil. Thank you so much, Kim, for joining us. Bom dia.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak. Also, apologize for any mistakes in my vocabulary or pronunciation since I'm not a native speaker, and it's a pleasure to talk to you.
No problem. No problem at all. Let's talk a little bit about Brazil. I lived in Brazil. I know for sure Brazil has an extremely large Jewish community. It's the 10th largest in the world. There's about 120,000 Jews who live in Brazil, especially São Paulo. Are they safe right now?
Well, that's not very clear right now. I mean, I would say they were safe like 2 years ago, but right now, I think anti-Semitism in Brazil is rising. You just showed the words from José Genuíno, which is a very powerful Brazilian politician, and this is racism. This is openly anti-Semitism. This is a hatred for Jews, something we would not think to live with that in Brazil. Like 2 or 3 years ago, we always thought we were a plural and peaceful community that is open for everybody, that is open for immigrants, that is open for every religion. And it's very scary to see this kind of thing happening in our country. Last week, I filed a legal action against José Genuíno for racism. And since we just saw he had advocated for a boycott of Jewish companies simply based on the ethnic origin of their owners. And it's kind of the attitude of what we've seen in the beginning of Nazism and other times in history with other races, like in apartheid and also in racist movements in the United States in the 1960s. So it's very scary to see this happening in our country. And I think it's exactly what I just heard there, that the far left and the far right, they meet in the hatred for Jews, and this is also happening in Brazil, unfortunately.
Kim, let's give a little bit of a class as to where Brazil fits into all this, and I'll tell you what I'm looking for from you. The temperature has been this way because of the far left that secured power in Brazil. That Lula, who is the president, is coming from the far left. Give us a little bit of a history lesson as to how anti-Semitism has risen through the left in Brazil.
Well, the position of the left in Brazil puts its own values in question because it's highly inconsistent for this ideological field that claims, or at least claims, to be a defender of gay movements, women's rights, political and religious freedom, to position itself opposite in the only country in the Middle East where all these values are guaranteed. I mean, I've been in Israel last year, and I can say it's an island of democracy in an ocean of tyrannies. So if these leftists that got in power talking about democracy, talking about tolerance, talking about minorities and human rights, they seem not to care about the Jewish human rights. They seem not to care just because they do not consider the Jews a minority. They do not consider the Jews as human beings that should be defended like any other, like they say, they claim they defend, as I said, women's rights, gays' rights, and political and religious freedom, but these do not seem to apply to Jewish people. And that's scary just because they say, okay, so Benjamin Netanyahu is a far right prime minister, so we should not support any actions of Israel, even if it's just defending itself against a cruel and brutal terrorist attack. I mean, just because of Benjamin's political position, you would not stand for the Jews to defend themselves, to defend their lives. I mean, to me, it makes absolutely no sense.
Well, let's also tell the viewers how Brazil has supported the ICJ court case of South Africa versus Israel, and how Brazil also, the judge in the Brazilian case, in this case, the Brazilian judge voted in favor of all of the conditions that were ruled yesterday. And as part of a larger picture of the BRICS country, or the Global South, as it's called in the United Nations, that Brazil constantly votes against Israel in the Security Council.
Yeah, it's a shame for me that Brazil stands against Israel. I mean, historically, we are, as I said, a democracy, a country of tolerance, a plural country. and now we're standing against the self-defense right of Israel. I mean, both the genocide and Geneva Convention were made with an international system in mind, where the main actors are states, but that's not the case. I mean, in recent decades, states have ceased to have such a prominent role, and some organizations, including terrorist ones like Hamas, have become the protagonists of security issues. But Hamas is not a state. This complicates everything, whether from a military, political, or a legal standpoint. But anyway, one thing is absolutely certain and clear for me. All parties in conflict, they must observe humanitarian law very strictly. The main rules to avoid the suffering for civilians. But the problem is, this rule is very difficult to apply. I mean, Hamas does not have an army. It's a terrorist group that blends in with the local population, and they seem to use humanitarian laws to use humans as shields and use the media and the United Nations to put the word against Israel. And unfortunately, Brazil seems to be playing Hamas game, and by Hamas rules. I mean, it's very convenient to go to the International Court of Justice because they only have jurisdiction over states. But as I said, Hamas is not a state. So you have a conflict where one party answers to the court and the other cannot.
Oh, Kim, I'm just going to ask you a question in terms of the irony of this all, because Brazil has an issue with the Amazonians, the people who live in the Amazon, by the Amazon forest, and also in the north of Brazil in terms of racism. And so it seems very ironic that this occurs.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it's coming from a president, like I said, his rise into power, he's back in power because he said he would defend democracy, because he said he would stand for human rights, and that's not what we're seeing. And I think one more thing is important for me to say, that unfortunately this support of Brazil in the South Africa against Israel in the International Court of Justice, this position of the Brazilian government is not the position of the Brazilian parliament. Most of the opposition representative, but even government representatives in the parliament, they do not stand for this position against Israel. I mean, we approved last year a motion just to support Israel and its right to self-defense, and it had the more than 300 votes. We are in a 513 members of the parliament, and it had the support of the majority, even of representatives that usually vote with the government, which are Lula supporters. So right. This position for me is absolutely unreasonable, even from a political perspective here in Brazil.
Kim, I hope that the folks in Higienópolis and Rio and in Recife, all the Jewish community there, feel safe. And so thank you very much for joining us live from São Paulo, Brazil. Kim Kataguiri, the Brazilian congressman and also a Brazilian Union Party member, the founding member of Free Brazil Movement. Thank you again for joining us, and bom dia.
Once again, and thank you for the opportunity, and bom dia.